Hey everybody, welcome to yet another match in the Yamato on Hotspot again, and because this was right after the 0.3.1 patch dropped, there are battleships galore. In fact, I was getting almost entirely games without carriers in, which was certainly not something I was going to complain about. Started off in the southeast spawn. There's a second Yamato on our team, just off to my front right. We've also got quite a few US battleships, including several Colorados. 2 destroyers per team. We have an additional cruiser. The enemy do not have any cruisers. Right away, our team begins to flock towards the southwest corner of the map, because the best play on this map is generally to try and agree with your teammates to link up somewhere and then actually do it. If you stay spread out, you're going to get pincered on by the enemy team, so basically you have to decide on a pincer on them first and hope your gunnery is more accurate. Now, comparing it to the Izuma from my previous videos, you can see just how different the overall design of the Yamato is. Even though the hull shape is very similar, there are a lot of other differences. The basic gun layout for a start, the positioning of the AA guns. In the Yamato, they are mostly in covered triple turrets of 25mm guns clustered around the central superstructure as opposed to scattered around the deck. This is in stark contrast to the Izuma, where they're mostly open gun positions and they are spread around the edges of the deck with very little firepower towards the center of the ship.
Problem solved, sir.
Another difference is the fact that Yamato has very prominent sort of bulges around its belt. Not as much as some battleships, but still more than the Izuma, whose hull sides are really quite streamlined looking. Taken some minor damage off the enemy so far, but nothing too bad. I've already managed to get a Citadel hit in on the enemy Amagi, and as I round the island I fire off another broadside towards him. They're in the air for quite a while, but unfortunately they all fall astern. That's okay, because the enemy team are heading straight into the pincer formed by our battleships. And you can see some hits going in there from my teammates. Now, despite its enormous size, the Yamato does actually handle quite well. It's quite fast for a battleship, let alone one this big. Its turn rate isn't too bad. Its rudder shift's a little slow, but it's certainly not the worst I've dealt with. How's that for a sight? 2 Yamatos right next to each other. Historically, of course, Japan built 3 hulls. 2 of them were battleships, Yamato and Musashi, and the third, Shinano, was an aircraft carrier, a very large aircraft carrier. However, from what I understand, it wasn't really able to compete with the air wing size of the American carriers. It was more a support carrier for refit and rearming of aircraft. I don't think it carried its own particularly large air wing. I don't know much about aircraft carriers though, much less Japanese ones, so if somebody wants to correct me on anything, feel quite free to do so. Musashi was the first to be sunk in the Sibuyan Sea and was actually discovered this year quite deep water. She was sunk by air attack. Yamato herself was also sunk by air attack during Operation Tengo on the basically what amounted to a suicide run towards, let's say it was Iwo Jima, I think it was. It might have been Okinawa. I can't remember which of the two islands it was, but it was one of those two. I think it was Iwo Jima. And she was going to be run aground and used as a shore battery if she even made it, and then engage the US fleet from there with the rest of her crew disembarking to fight as infantry. She never made it because the Americans were shadowing her right from the start, and that was that. There's not much a battleship can do against the might of the US Navy's air fleet. The Shinano was sunk while in transit along the Japanese coast, from what I recall, by a submarine. So, all three hulls of this class were sunk. They didn't really see a huge amount of combat. Yamato herself was held in Truk Lagoon for most of the war, basically serving as a hotel, hence her nickname Hotel Yamato. She was mostly used to garrison troops and was kept away from the enemy because, heaven forbid, the IJN lose not only the biggest battleship in the world, but one named after Japan. Musashi saw a little more action, engaging enemies on the surface. Yamato did actually take part in, I think, at least one or two surface engagements. I think she was present around Leyte Gulf, I think. Again, I'm not real big on my naval history, I only know bits and pieces, but I do distinctly recall seeing photographs taken of the Gambia Bay sinking with a Yamato-class battleship in the background. I think it was Yamato, because I think by that stage Musashi had already been sunk. So although they didn't really do much in terms of surface combat, they were still very impressive ships. Unfortunately, they were just too late. By 1944-45, the battleship was pretty much outdated as anything other than a means of shore bombardment, and indeed that's what most of the US battleships ended up doing anyway. The aircraft carrier was where the true power lied. And unfortunately for the Japanese, they were rather slow to pick up on that, and so I think they only built 16 carriers, and the US, by comparison, and Britain combined built 155 of them. So, whelp. Better than the Germans, who built a carrier, never finished it, and used it to store lumber for the entirety of the war. So there's that. Anyway, having dealt with a lot of the enemy ships in the west, I decided to swing east and start getting resets on the cap. Not really getting big hits in at the moment, but I am getting resets, and that's all that really matters. You can see the friendly Colorado there, just got his ship kicked in. The Iowa is the obvious target here. He's the most powerful of the enemy ships that I can see. So as he's about to scoot behind an island, I blast a full broadside, and I'm able to knock most of his remaining hit points off. I begin to shift my fire towards this Colorado. Who evades a spread of torps from our destroyer. The other destroyer already died, but he was able to take 2 enemy ships with him. We lose another battleship, and things are starting to look just a little bit ropey now. Colorado still hasn't taken any significant damage. In fact, I don't think they've even taken a hit. And so I'm just in the process of letting another broadside go when the enemy battleships to my east unmask themselves from behind the island. And there's a pretty nice
Target
citadel.
penetrated.
I was preparing to finish the Colorado off when all of a sudden I'm taking hits on my right. Oh, it's the North Carolina. And that was a very big mistake on his part because it got my attention. Right away I swing my bow towards him to give him a bad angle to try and get shots into me, and fire off my forward guns. Kaboom.
Enemy battleship sunk.
I continue my turn to unmask my stern turret and get ready to let loose another 3 18-inch shells into this Nagato. Secondaries open up. There goes the citadel. And I just need to wait for my bow guns to reload, and this guy will be toast. Rip.
We destroyed an enemy battleship.
I take only fairly light damage in the process, and begin to look back towards the Colorado, but it's not likely to be up much longer. My team are now focusing fire on it as they hold the cap. At this stage, it looks like we're going to cap out, unless the Colorado can land some impressive resets, which I don't think they're going to. The other 2 enemy battleships are way too far northwest to do anything. The Yamato is actually in range to get resets, but whether he will hit them or not is another thing entirely. And so I begin making a turn back towards the cap in case my teammates need my support. But it looks like we've got things pretty much handled at this point, and we do still have a lone battleship up north who is keeping the enemy Yamato busy. In fact, our other Yamato and our Nagato are both full health, so they had a pretty easy time of things, and sure enough, we managed to scoop up the game.